right. Morning, everyone. Hope everyone is having a great Monday so far. It's just about 10 a.m. PST here. I'm in the Vancouver office, and for those who don't know myself, I'm Peter McMath. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at WPIC, and really fortunate to be joined by our Chief Executive Officer and co-founder Jacob Cooke, who's here with me in Vancouver. I see everyone's just dialing in. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Matt. Hi, Kim. Today we've got 30 minutes scheduled for a Q&A with Jacob on all things D2C in China, specific to pet. So we're really looking forward to today's session. As you get settled in here, there should be a Q&A portal in the GoToWebinar control panel that you can access. I'd encourage everyone to make use of that while we have Jacob's time this morning to ask any questions that they may have. So we want to keep this quick and valuable for everyone here today. For those of you who aren't familiar with WPIC, we're a full-service digital and e-commerce agency headquartered in Beijing, where Jacob's typically based. The teams are spread across 7 campuses, 3 of which are in mainland China. With total headcount, Jacob, where are we at in China today in terms of headcount?
So 365 in China.
Great, and growing quickly. And so we really want to use this session. I mean, we obviously work in a lot of different industries and categories. We want to use this session to just really help educate the group here on some of the trends, some of the key questions that a lot of organizations have. So I'm going to kick off. We've got some questions that were sent in advance that we'll start with, but maybe Jacob, just to open it up, what are you seeing today? I mean, we're in the 4th quarter in a really interesting year in China here in 2022. Specific to pet, maybe, what are some of the trends you're seeing in the broader landscape in China today?
Yeah, in particular for pet, what we see is strong Q2s and strong Q4s, Q4 being the strongest of the year, specifically related to e-commerce. That's primarily because you've got 2 of the largest 3 e-commerce festivals in Q4 with 11/11 and 12/12. In general, we've seen, inverted trend in China with mother baby categories compared to pet, with there being more pets out there, so less birth rates have been declining. I'm not sure if those 2 are related. We think that they are in other countries as well, so we're not surprised that we see that stuff in China. But overall, very steady growth over the last couple of years, including the pandemic. More and more people certainly are buying those products online. They have easier access, quicker access, and sometimes it could be the only access as those lockdowns, battered the first 3 quarters of 2022. So, we would anticipate these growth lines would project fairly linearly into Q4, again, strongest quarter of the year. But I don't think there's a lot of pessimism to that out in the market either. This should be relatively as expected.
Excellent. Thank you. So, we get a ton of questions in my day-to-day here and speaking with brands around entry specific to pet. Can you maybe speak a little bit to cross-border e-commerce specific to pet, and what are some of the most common channels that you're seeing new brands enter the market through?
Cross-border for pet, as cross-border for most categories, allows for a little bit easier entry, especially for brands that may not have gone through all their trademark processing or don't have local approvals for product yet. It's actually a pretty good stepping stone for a lot of organizations into the market, making the compliance barrier a little bit easier. Logistics-wise, it doesn't make much of a difference. Your product is shipped into free trade zones and then imported by the end user, as opposed to a local model where you have a larger trade company importing that, usually by the container load, and becoming the importer of records. That just takes a little bit more at customs. Need your ducks in a row a little bit more. But roughly I'd say people are 50-50 split between those 2 different tactics.
Great. I'm just going to remind everyone, for those of you who are just joining us now, we have a Q&A portal, so feel free to input your questions into the portal, and hopefully we'll get to all of them through the session here. So that's great. So, I mean, what are the most popular cross-border e-commerce platforms today in China? What are you seeing on the rise and owning most of the market share specific to pet?
Yeah, Tmall's been there for a long time. JD Crossborder as well. I mean, in terms of pet, it's usually about the second largest category overall when you really break down into like the 33 subcategories. So, JD does really well at that, especially in tier one. Tmall sort of all throughout the rest of the country. What you're really seeing though is Douyin coming up for pet as well. They're dominating right now in fashion and making really good inroads about health and wellness and pet. So people are learning about new things for their pets on Douyin. It's more of an impulse buy, whereas those daily staples really sort of feed into like 11 and 11 and 12 12. So if you're kind of at a mass market appeal, I mean, Tmall and JD are probably still your best bets. If you've got something new and innovative that you want to get out in more of a social commerce environment, then Douyin's probably going to be the platform for you.
For those who maybe aren't familiar with Douyin, can you just give a broad overview to the platform?
Yeah, it's the original TikTok that started in China. It's a little bit more advanced in terms of features, as they usually test them out in China and then roll them out in other places around the world. But in terms of its revenue model, it's extremely commerce focused. So it figured out that it could out algorithm the e-commerce platforms because they have more data, certainly on content consumption, that they've really started into really dominating social commerce. It's done in short video format. Or live broadcast. People and good brands are putting out between 7 and 8 hours of content every day on these channels. So it can be a little bit different than what you're used to in terms of like static product shots and things like that, but definitely seeing a lot of high growth in that area, especially for innovative products.
Great. I see another question coming in here. I think, as a follow-up on the cross-border question, it's how do we handle labeling? Do we need local labeling? And how does WPIC support with that?
Yeah, well, our warehouse handles the labeling. Yeah, there's compliance issues that need to go on both for cross-border. Domestic is even more so. A lot of people, by the time they are going domestic, it actually probably makes sense to review packaging as volumes are higher. Typically through there, but yeah, it's a compliance issue. It has to do with certain translations of ingredients and things like that. Certain things need to be translated and put in Chinese. That happens at the warehouse level. So no, most brands don't need to worry about that themselves. The 3PL and logistics companies will do that, and they'll automate that process.
Great. I see a question from Ronald here. Is just asking how long does this take? So and I'm not sure the history of the brand. I'm assuming it's a new brand that's probably not active yet. For that profile of a new company that's not yet active in China, what is total time to go live equate to?
There's probably a lot of steps they go, but they actually all run concurrently. So, your store opening can be done in as soon as 30 days. Usually what the longest portion of that process is inventory planning, maybe even production and shipments out to one of the free trade zones or warehouses in China. That travel time can be about 5 to 6 weeks. It's come way down though recently. It's gotten a lot cheaper recently as well. While that time is going on, store applications are being done, the artistic localization is being done, these types of things, price plans. So it really sort of all works in tandem. So basically, if your inventory is going to take 5 to 6 weeks to get out here, that's about the timeline that you're working off of.
Great. Just a reminder, everyone, I see a few more questions coming in here, but feel free to input any of your questions in the chat box as we move along here. And hopefully we can get to all of them. So a question here on content and marketing collateral. Does that need to be changed significantly? Do I need to use Asian models for my images and videos? Is that something that you're seeing, like, Western brands that likely have Western models and Western copy and everything? Like, how much localization is typically required?
In pet, we would redo that. I think there's also, just the profile of pets too, especially on the dog side, is very different sizes that, where those shots may have, used in much larger dogs, for example. We're going to redo not only the foreign models that you would see, but also the animals parts of that too as well. And in a lot of cases, we inherit, like I said, static images, which means we sort of have to do the online filming for the shorter pieces, the 5, the 10, the 30, the 60-second shots that are integrated into the various platforms. We've done, live broadcasting though in pet cafes, you name it, where we've got a lot of experience working with live animals in terms of the content production side. But yeah, in most cases, it's going to need to be redone, localized, and in some of those cases, hopefully you could actually turn around and use some more of that marketing material globally too. It certainly does happen. So think of it all as working into one big pot. Now, the one thing is, we probably premising this on coming from North America too, right? But a lot of stuff does circulate around Asia as well, and we're pretty good about being able to use those same shots in, say, Korea, Japan, or China, Singapore as well.
Gotcha. A question that I have, on that note, I think as you think about content, as you speak about marketing, I think a lot of people are familiar with Tmall and JD and the big traditional, legacy marketplaces. What are you seeing in social today? You mentioned Douyin. We talked a little bit about like the TikTok of China, but more broadly for social, what's that channel mix look like? How active are pet brands in social? Is that like we and you do a lot in beauty and in other categories, but how does social looked at in pet, and what are some of the things you're seeing there?
Well, the data that we have too online, I think it's important to note that almost 70% of purchases related to pet are done by females. Okay, so it biases very heavily towards women. So you would apply that to social media as that also bias well towards women, like Little Red Book, which is mainly fashion, but there's a lot of stuff on pet there too, and health and wellness and things like that. Those are places where people are influenced. A little bit on WeChat, but not nearly as much as, like TikTok, Douyin, and Little Red Book, for example. These are big for pet. And again, remember that female number too, as you're creating your content, as you're, what your value props are, and understanding that sort of consumer profile, because it does skew.
Great. Okay. Next question here. So, someone wanted to jump right into the numbers. I'm not going to call them out, but, what is the typical time horizon for profitability, and do you have benchmarks for this?
I think it really depends upon your goals, right? I mean, we have pet food brands that wanted to do $100 million. They were willing to put that horizon, out to 3 years, aggressively go after market share. If you're a little bit more niche and you're not sort of aimed after that 100, a lot of people might try to be profitable on 1 million. I mean, that's very doable in the first year, for example. So and depending on if the brand is known there at all, also dependent. I mean, it can take 3 to 6 to even 9 months, depending on what type of product it is, if it's saturated, to really build a brand in China. So these are some things to take into account. But in terms of, I think, a lot of markets, the time horizon usually in China, compared to other Asian markets, is much shorter.
Great. I see another question here from Kelly, and it's, can we be successful without the major marketplaces? So I'm assuming, like, without Tmall, without JD, like, can a brand enter China and see some level of success without entering the big marketplaces?
I think people really define that success as multiple things. But I mean, we see people who just launch on social media, for example, because they're trying to measure and gauge demand before they move significant inventory into the market. So from that point of view, yes, you could run a social commerce campaign that may not, be doing $1 million a year, but is certainly giving you a core set of metrics that says, hey, this is really going to work. There is demand here, and it might be worth moving from, a simpler WeChat store onto a Tmall or a JD or both at that point. So that's a possibility, but I think the majority of long-term successful plans in China that deal with, higher revenue are certainly going to involve the big platforms.
Okay. Moving through, question here from Alex. How do we protect our IP in the market? And I guess there's two sides to that, maybe the product side as well as the brand side.
I think the brand side probably the more important, just because of where most things are produced. I mean, not toys or furniture could be in issues, but certainly registering trademarks first and foremost. And if you've registered your trademarks and then you've invested in that brand, you're always going to have a little bit of a moat. It's always going to be known that, that's a little bit safer. You've got 6 to 9 months of dealing with consumers and getting good positive reviews. That's always going to keep you ahead of anybody who's trying to counterfeit maybe a toy. You don't really have that issue with the food. Those are kind of taken very seriously in China, like criminal offenses. I think the only areas that you're going to find real sort of IP potential there is, like I said, on the toys, the stuff that would be easier to copy and duplicate. The trademark, absolutely go get those trademarks, even if you're not thinking China. Your trademarks globally should be up to date at all times. Sure. Way too many times we've seen people neglect that, and then they run into a problem where they could potentially be sitting on a poacher and have to deal with that as well.
Very, very good advice. And one question I get a lot, I think, from Western brands has always been in the realm of price acceptancy, right? Our portfolio is largely made up of like premium tiered brands, and I think there's a concern that maybe there's not a market acceptance for a high-end premium pet food brand, for example, or snack. What are you seeing in the category? What exists? What's driving the growth today in terms of the different price bands that exist in this category?
Yeah, for both cat and dog, just to stick to the two main categories there, you actually have foreign brands that are very high in the top 10 for foods in both of those. Pet food can be actually quite expensive to produce in China. And in a lot of cases, you see imports. It's one of the areas actually that does have a higher percentage than most in terms of the product consumption spread in China being skewed to import.
Great. And just a reminder, as we're getting near the end of the session here, feel free to, if you have any last minute questions, feel free to input them into the Q&A portal as we're going through here for Jacob. Okay, question here on resourcing. What resources do we need internally before commercialization or launching our brand? How do other brands handle this, i.e. do they outsource versus in-house talent? How do you advise on that?
Well, I think most brands are going to find what support they can in various markets, certainly if it's plenty far away from the existing markets that they're into. But that being said, I mean, the ideal partnership of what you're going to find is somebody who understands that market very well, somebody who's resourced adequately to execute in it, but also teamed up with the brand who understands their brand and their history and their product very well too as well. The resources should always be there to make sure that can be iterated. They can be there in early stages for approvals, for certainly how the brand is being represented, both aesthetically, maybe on videos too as well. So be prepared to be collaborative in that approach, not so much, doing any of the shots, but being there to make sure and help with that partner to make sure that it's on brand and it speaks to consumers the way that you've been speaking to consumers globally.
Great. I'm gonna maybe go a little rapid fire here. Question on distributors. How can I find a trusted distributor, and is this recommended?
I think it's been mixed over the years. I think that, what I don't see is distributor relationships lasting like a decade. For example, you see some quick hits, but a lot of calls are trying to unwind this model. I mean, you do have 80% of e-commerce in China, or basically being held between two platforms. That type of saturation allows you to really go direct. And in a lot of cases, those distributors too are going to be selling online. Now, that's going to take some resources to manage. I mean, you should probably have your direct channels open first, because that's going to give you more leverage. First of all, when negotiating with distributors, they're going to see there's very clear demand there. I also wouldn't ever expect them to really invest in the brand, either in the short term or the long term. We really don't see that from distributors. So they can definitely serve a role. I think you should be setting up your direct channels first and having them come to you. I think that puts you in a way better position.
That's great. Question here on Tmall Global. Are cross-border e-commerce platforms like Tmall Global viable? Why are they so much smaller than the domestic versions?
Well, it actually would have to depend on the category of whether they're smaller than domestic versions. But I mean, the bulk of consumption in China happens domestically. I mean, foreign brands still are minority contributors in most categories, and that goes to a lot of things. I mean, it's just a massive consumption market. So that's basically why Tmall, when you look at their big categories, it's going to be a lot in apparel that's made in China. It's going to be also a lot in daily staples that is made and produced in China that dominate 80 to 90% of the market. So once you sort of take away those two categories, you get a little bit closer in terms of maybe your higher end consumer goods, for sure.
That's great. I want to take a pause here and also just note if you've got any questions, feel free to input them into the portal. Jacob, one thing that hits my desk a lot is questions around domestic Chinese brands versus foreign brands. What are you seeing in pet today within the dog and cat categories, and how do foreign brands stack up against some of the Chinese brands that maybe here in the West we're not familiar with?
Well, in a lot of cases, I think consumers have been showing willing to spend significant resources on their pets. Meaning that specifically you do see, like I said, imported doing quite well in this category. If you look at a lot of other categories, for sure, I mean, local brands are gaining market share across a lot of companies. It's not to do with, potential negative feelings about foreign brands. It's actually to do with the effectiveness of Chinese brands now. So they're getting a lot better. They've been learning, manufacturing for 20 years, but also in a lot of cases, they're taking in a lot of data and making products that are specifically for China, not caring actually about the international market, thinking that China is so big. So they're designing products with the exact price points in mind, the color profiles, and they're not, say, like Nike trying to design a runner for the entire world. They're really just focused on China, and that's resonating quite well. They're getting the price points right. They're getting the quality profile right. So they're doing quite well, for sure. But in most cases, the majority of the foreign brands that we work with are still up year over year, and the numbers in the import data holds to that. But there is a larger share of the new consumption being taken up by local brands. They are catching up, so to speak, to what was going on like 5 to 10 years ago.
Not to put you on the spot, I mean, as I don't know how much data you have at your fingertips, you talk about growth within the category. I mean, what do you see pet growing at over the last 12, 24 months? Obviously, we've seen a lot of, fluctuation and channel change through COVID, but how has pet been growing in the last couple of years here?
We have it at 10 to 12% next year, and that's kind of getting rid of the craziness due to COVID. And that's going to be a combination of new pet owners kind of split equally between people also increasing the spend on their existing animals. So that's where we have it from an online consumer base. I think there's also a lot more growth that's happening sort of at an offline basis in terms of veterinarian too. They would probably be much outpacing what you would see in consumer.
Great. Okay, let me get back into the questions here. Really tactical question. Do we need a Chinese bank account?
You don't necessarily. Your importer can handle most of that. It is one of the things, though, if you were looking to set up your own office there, depending, there's a cycle, right, for how things work. For one, the cross-border is the easiest. No trademark, no business license, no bank account. And then as you garner into making further investments, you're probably going to go with the domestic partner and importer, and then you might get to the point where you set up a representative office in China. People do this especially when they get a lot of their product produced there. In that case, yeah, you would start to get bank accounts, business licenses, these types of things, but certainly not from day one. You do not need that, no.
Great. And this is a good maybe follow up to that from Nancy here. If thinking about the infrastructure required, is it required for a brand to have a Chinese website? Is that needed today? And what's your view on that?
We look, I think a website, the definition is sort of changing. You should have available web content, but a lot of people are choosing to post that and put that on social media platforms like WeChat. So WeChat is essentially a browser. You would create a mini site inside that platform that would be mobile only, and that certainly is extremely acceptable as a bare minimum product to communicate with the market. Website certainly is a lot of things that you can do with that. Baidu is not totally irrelevant yet, But yeah, people are, where that would have been a necessity 5 years ago, people are electing to just maybe go with a detailed social media experience over the web investment.
Great. I know we're at the 5-minute mark here. Maybe Jacob, just to wrap up, I mean, what's your top 3 things that a Western or foreign pet brand should be thinking about and be aware of? I mean, what are 3 of the best practices? And maybe what are 3 things that are mistakes that you're seeing pet brands make today?
Well, in a lot of cases, I think that, like we said before, I think that a lot of small brands have grown really quickly with some really innovative products. There's a lot of good stuff out there right now. And in general, you still see kind of this big spike in spend. So the companies are smaller on average than you would see like in the fashion space, maybe even the nutrition health space. So, I mean, a lot in terms of getting those trademarks ready. Like if your product is going gangbusters in the US or Europe, well, yeah, eventually, you're going to get financing, you're going to be able to go global as well. But before you do that, keep your paperwork in order. Make sure that you're set up in a space, because people are watching these trends in other markets too. It does leave you exposed if you're not getting that paperwork proper. 2, I think understand that it's still a growing industry in terms of numbers of pet owners, and pretty solid growth that's outpacing general consumption growth in China. So, pet is outperforming certainly the general market. And 3, I think that, the price points are rising also much higher than price points are rising in other categories too, which means people are willing to spend more. They're willing to pamper their pet more, and these types of things. So I think overall, it's been very steady growth for a long time, and there really is nothing that we're seeing in the data that this is about to slow down or reverse anytime in the short to medium term.
Amazing. Look, I know we said this was going to be 30 minutes. We're 3 minutes to. I believe we got through everything. And so, Jacob, I want to thank you for your time today, and thanks to everyone for joining us. If anyone has other questions that we didn't get to today or that come to you later, you can visit our website at WPIC.co. You can email myself, peter.mcmath@WPIC.co as well, or check us out on LinkedIn. And would be thrilled to take a discussion offline. So look, I'm going to give everyone 2 minutes back in their day and keep everyone on track. Jacob, thank you for your time, and looking forward to doing this again.
Thanks for the conversation. It was great. Bye-bye.